What's up, everybody? This is Dan Hornacek with Leading on the Frontlines podcast. Excited to be back. Again, I hope everybody had a good holiday season and is transitioning back into real life. I know it's been kind of difficult for me, just kind of get back into working full weeks and, getting back to the whole work mode since I had that week off. But really excited about today's topic. It's kind of cliche, but I'm really excited to do it. This week, I want to focus on positive thought. I know it's something that there's a million memes and a million different inspirational posts and things like that, and there's a reason for that, and it's because I think it plays a really big role in our everyday lives and how we come across to people and how our internal kind of workings, what it's kind of like a diet. What you feed yourself is what you are, right? And if you're feeding yourself a lot of negative thoughts, you're going to be inherently negative. So one of the things I wanted to focus on today is the power of positivity, right? I'm really excited about this new year. I think it's going to be really good for me personally and my family, and I think I'm not trying to jump on the train of new year, new me. That's not what I'm doing at all, but I think it's nice to kind of take on the motivation of, a fresh start, if you will, even though it's really not. It's just another day on the calendar, but I think we can all take a lot away from it. So with one of the things, that I've experienced in my life, everyone deals with bouts of, just negative mindset, depression, things like that. And I'm not talking about like clinical type stuff. I'm just saying like just in general, right? And I think that one of the things, we talk a lot about at work stuff, and one of the things I think shouldn't be kind of left aside is what you do outside of work too. We talk a lot about culture building and building up teams and serving our people, all for, relatively positive things, selfishly and not selfishly, things that are going to get your metrics and your grading system to your superiors are obviously going to benefit from it, and your employees are going to benefit from these things. But I think, if when you're outside of work, if everything's just extremely negative or just kind of going down that, cynical path, eventually that's going to creep up and show its ugly face to your people. So I think it's important to, like I mentioned before, have a diet of positive influence in your life. Outside of work, keeping negative influences kind of away or at bay. So with social media and, even, with podcasts, audiobooks, the stuff that you're ingesting, right? The things that you're watching on Netflix, these have subconscious, effects on who we are and how we act around others. It's obvious that when we're sad, we like to listen to sad music, right? Because we kind of like want to want to feel the emotion in a different way, and I think it's a little different, but I think that, than what we're talking about here. Keeping negative influences out. One of the things that I recently did actually was, if I'm going through my Instagram feed or, my Facebook feed, and I see something that's like, maybe it's something that is funny or it's, satire or whatever, but it really is still a negative way of looking at things. I've been trying to hide that stuff and focus on more just impactful stuff, because I think it gets a positivity, quote unquote, right, gets a bad rap for people to think it's all like clouds and rainbows. And I think there's a big difference between positivity and optimism. I think those are two very different things. Positivity, I think is something that, like I said, just has a stigma of people who are positive all the time are these like huge optimists. And anybody who knows me knows I'm not an optimist, but I try to be pretty positive. I'm human too, so I'm fallible just like everybody else, and I'm not always that way. But cheesy ways to do this, though, I think is finding meme pages of positivity. Watching kind of. My wife actually mentioned to me about a few months ago how I was watching old movies. And the reason I was watching those old movies is because they had kind of that like cheesy kind of positive vibe. Like I was watching Mission Impossible, the first one, and it's cool because you've got this guy who is on his own and he's being framed, and he kind of comes out of it as the hero. Same with like Karate Kid. I know that's a really old movie, and there's things that, depending on where you are in life or with your career, one of the quotes that comes from that movie is, there are no bad students, only bad teachers. And going back to the book that I mentioned last week, which is Worth Defending, How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life, Horian says that to his first student, Richard Bressler, when Richard was just not able to do the moves that Horian was trying to teach him. That's exactly what he said. And it's funny too, because I didn't even realize it until recently that quote probably came from that movie, was when he said that. So depending on dates and time, but you can read books. I've been trying to find some more positive oriented books. And it's kind of funny that some of these books, like one that really sticks out in my head, and I was thinking about this before I started recording today. There was a book I read in grade school. It was I don't know if it was an autobiography or just a biography on Lance Armstrong, the bicyclist. And anybody who knows him or anything about him, I mean, he was like the pinnacle. He was unbeatable with Tour de France's and things like that. And I remember that he got testicular cancer, and then he overcame that. And it's a pretty inspiring story. And it's funny because 20 years later, after reading this book, come to find out that there was like massive scandals with him, like with blood transfusions during the races and things like that. But I don't think that, and don't get me wrong, that sucks, right? You could allow it to take away from the person, and maybe you should, but I don't think it should take away from like the inspiration of the story. I think within today's society with mindsets, it's easy to sit there, and now that this scandal has come out, it's completely debased anything from that person. And I understand that, but you can still pull inspiration from this person and what they've accomplished. And yeah, okay, he had blood transfusions, maybe that's why he won. Okay, that's fine. He still beat cancer. He still was able to bike afterwards. And taking away these little things from those stories, I think, is the point, right? Because my next point to this is, you need to have people who inspire you. This doesn't have to be people it doesn't have to be a celebrity, it doesn't have to be like the typical person. It could be a random book you found, and like just reading it and you be inspired by the author, or even a fictional character within a book that they wrote. And because the thing is, going back to the Lance Armstrong thing, there will always be a negative story. No matter, I don't care who you are, there's going to be some type of negative story tied to them in some way. And I think it's important to look at the action that is inspiring, to pull the positivity and inspiration from that. Take that for how you will, but I think it's important. And I have a lot of people that inspire me, and I think it's important to kind of talk about that as well. My wife, for one, she's a really big inspiration for me. She was always like thinking. I think I know it sounds dumb, but like she's always thinking about stuff, and to the point where if it was me, I'd be exhausted. So the fact that she does this and so consistently, and she does this, and it shows through our life transitions that I've been able to share with her. When we met, we were, just two single people and, living life, and it was great. And then, we ended up moving across the country, and we got married, and, then we moved back, and then we get buy a house, and we have kids. I mean, and through all of this, to see how she handled each one of those life transitions with trying to be as knowledgeable about it as she could be, and just trying to put her best foot forward on it, was pretty inspiring. She put in the work, and she did the research, and that's really inspiring to me, and I think it should be inspiring to anyone. Another person for me is Steven Ranella. He's on the show Meat Eater. He's a hunter and a author. I've read all of his books, and to see him make his passion his job is really inspiring too. That's why I'm doing this podcast. Leadership is a passion of mine, and I want to be able to share that. And reading some of his early books, it's really cool because you're reading from a past Stephen, right? You're reading from a person who is either in it or who just left those stories, and it's pretty inspiring to see that to where he is now. And and again, to kind of tie it back to what I was talking about with negativity, a lot of people are saying that he's quote unquote selling out now, or he's too big, and things like that, and like the show's lost some of its grandeur or whatever it might be. That doesn't take away from the person who wrote those first books, right? It's still inspiring to see, to watch season 1 of his show to now. And yeah, there's been a lot of changes, and if there's no change, there's no growth. And I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand. And for me, that's pretty inspiring to see someone take his passion and do what he's doing. I don't think I could talk on this podcast without mentioning Gary V, or Gary Vanderchuk. His whole story. I mean, he was with wine, in the wine business with his family, and they became very successful. But for me, it's his total. He really changed the paradigm on leadership as a whole. If you're listening to this podcast, I highly, highly recommend jumping on his Instagram or his LinkedIn profile. He posts some of the most inspiring and positive stuff that I've ever seen, and I really, really enjoy listening to him. I've listened to his podcast. It's good. It's just really not my style. I really like listening to his speeches that he gives, and when he does one-on-ones with people and interviews and stuff like that. He just really changed the game, and he's been a huge influence on my leadership style. And one other one is Evan Centopani. He's a professional bodybuilder. I was a bodybuilder for 4 years, competing in bodybuilding shows and things like that. I know it doesn't look like it now if you're watching on YouTube. That was many years ago. But one of the things at the time, right, and I still think about to this day, is the discipline involved. Right, he's such a disciplined person, and not so much like your immediate thought typically is like, oh, he goes to the gym every day. Yeah, that does take a lot of discipline, but from a nutritional standpoint, the research that he puts into the how nutrients work, how dieting impacts you. A lot of bodybuilders just eat fish and rice 8 times a day, and very low greens and stuff like that. And he really, in a lot of his videos on Instagram and YouTube and things, he really dives deep into nutrition and recipes, and it's kind of neat to see that. And the cool thing about it too is he's so family oriented as well. He's got kids and a wife, and he always kind of keeps, you always know it, right? Even as, in the fitness world, right? As a bodybuilder, he's a celebrity, right? And to see him hold his family up so high, I think is really cool. And they're always around, right? He doesn't like showcase them, but they're always around, and you could tell it's important to him. And that means a lot to me because my family is extremely important to me as well. So, one other one is Jorge Gracie. He came here alone, and with the ultimate goal of just giving jiu-jitsu to the world, which I thought was really neat. He started from nothing here. In Brazil, he was well-to-do, and he decided to come to America with nothing. And he completely changed the world of martial arts and started the UFC. So it's pretty cool. I mean, to read those people's stories and hear about what they can offer to the world. And if you listen to like Jorge and Gracie's story, there's some periods of time where he just wasn't a good person. But love him or hate him, he still did great things for a lot of people. There's people who today, who are practicing a martial art where if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't even know about it. So it's kind of one of those things where you could easily discount the person or discount the inspiration or positivity you can get from that person. But it doesn't change the facts of what they did to even create this positive or inspirational tone about whatever they've done. So I think by doing to kind of play off of that, I think it's important to, when you're looking at these people who inspire you. Sadly, a lot of people are like, yeah, but did you hear X, Y, and Z happened when, they were overseas or whatever? It's like, great. That's not the point, right? We're supposed to find these things that we find inspiring, and we should try to emulate those in our daily lives. Just like Evan Centopani, right? He's a professional bodybuilder. He builds these, does a lot of videos and stuff on nutrition. But my takeaway is that amongst all of that, he's a family-oriented person. I want to be a family-oriented person. And kind of like I mentioned last week, focus on what we want, not what we don't want, right? So if one of your people who are inspirational created something or just through certain actions or in a period of time in their life, it was a really inspirational thing to you, emulate that. If they ended up having an affair with their wife, don't do that, right? It doesn't mean you can't take the good away. And if that's what you want to emulate, if that's the type of person you want to be, then strive to be that person, and you will ultimately bring yourself up. So that's kind of my rant this week is focus on the power of positivity in your own life, right? If our diet is, I'll say dark humor, or if it's just like reading the news from just strictly a negative context, if you find yourself in conversations or just noticing when you're thinking about things, going down a path of, yes, but, right, this person does X, and because of that, they're a bad person. Like, okay, I mean, it's okay to not be naive to those things, but if that's your focus, then you're focusing on the wrong thing. And I think we could make some positive changes in our own life. I think it'll really help our own mental states. I think it'll make us more positive people. And like I said at the beginning of today's episode, this is going to bleed over into all the other stuff that we've talked about, right? It's going to bleed over in how you're trying to build a culture with your team. It's going to bleed over when you're trying to have a one-on-one with an employee who maybe you don't like them, or maybe you're just really upset with their performance. By ingesting more positive content, it's going to allow you to think in a way that's going to help positively impact other people. And I think right now, it's more important than ever. So that's all I got for this week on Leading on the Front Lines. Again, subscribe, rate, review. Would really, really appreciate it. And check me out on Instagram and YouTube, Leading on the Front Lines, or X, formerly known as Twitter, Leading the Front. My name is Dan Hornacek, and I'll be back next week with another episode of Leading on the Front Lines. Take care.